Dog says goodbye to police owner, but suddenly stops the doctor. The syringe trembled in Dr. Marcus Reed's hand as he prepared what should have been Sarah Collins's final dose of morphine. 3 months. That's what he'd told her. But if everything went according to plan, she wouldn't last 3 weeks. "This is it, girl," Sarah whispered to Max as they walked through the automatic doors of Mercy General Hospital. The 6-year-old Belgian Malinois had been restless during the entire drive from their home in suburban Atlanta, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an anxiety Sarah couldn't explain. 6 years. That's how long they'd been partners. Longer than most marriages last these days. 6 years of drug busts, bomb threats, and high-speed chases through the winding streets of Georgia's capital. 6 years of Max saving her life more times than she could count. And now she was about to hand him over to a stranger. The pancreatic cancer diagnosis had come like a lightning bolt 3 months ago. Stage 4, inoperable, terminal. The kind of news that makes a cop reassess everything. Every case left unsolved, every relationship left unfinished, every loyal partner left behind. Dr. Reed waited in the lobby, his pristine white coat a stark contrast to the sterile grey walls. Atlanta's premier oncologist, they called him, the man who'd supposedly guided dozens of terminal patients through their final months with compassion and expertise. The man who'd volunteered to adopt Max when Sarah's time came. "Officer Collins, Max," Dr. Reed smiled warmly, extending his hand. "I know this must be incredibly difficult." But the moment Reed stepped forward, Max did something that shattered Sarah's world. The dog that had never shown aggression toward an innocent person, the animal trained to distinguish between friend and foe with supernatural precision, suddenly positioned himself between Sarah and the doctor. A low, threatening growl rumbled from deep in his chest. "Max!" Sarah exclaimed, genuinely shocked. In 6 years of partnership, through shootouts and standoffs, Max had never acted this way towards someone who wasn't a genuine threat. "Perhaps he's sensing your anxiety," Reed suggested, his smile never wavering. "Animals are incredibly perceptive during emotional situations." But Sarah knew better. She'd learned to read Max's body language like a book, written in a language only they shared. This wasn't anxiety or confusion. This was a warning. Max's nostrils flared repeatedly, his ears pinned back, his entire body rigid with the kind of alertness he displayed when detecting explosives or narcotics. "Doctor, maybe we should postpone this," Sarah said, her hand instinctively moving toward her service weapon. 20 years on the Atlanta police force had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming danger. "Nonsense!" Reed replied, taking another step forward. "We discussed this extensively. Max needs a stable home, and I can provide." The words died in his throat as Max exploded into aggressive barking, the sound echoing off the hospital walls like gunshots. Nurses turned to stare, visitors backed away, and security guards began moving in their direction. But Sarah only had eyes for Dr. Reed's face. The compassionate mask had slipped just for a moment. In that split second, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. Not surprise or concern about Max's behavior, but calculation. The look of a man whose plan was falling apart. "Dr. Reed," Sarah said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had commanded respect in Atlanta's most dangerous neighborhoods, "I'm going to need you to step back. Now." Max's barking intensified, and Sarah noticed something else that sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. The dog wasn't just protecting her from Reed. He was positioning himself to block the doctor's access to the elevators, to any escape route. Reed's smile finally disappeared completely. "Officer Collins, I think your condition may be affecting your judgment. Perhaps we should discuss your situation privately." The way he said situation made Sarah's skin crawl. Not her illness, not her prognosis, her situation. Like she was a problem to be solved, rather than a patient to be treated. "Max, stay!" she commanded, pulling out her phone with her free hand. But she kept her eyes locked on Reed, watching as his expression shifted from fake concern to barely concealed irritation. "Detective Morrison, it's Sarah. I need backup at Mercy General, main lobby. Now." She paused, still watching Reed's face. "And bring a forensics team. We might have a situation." Reed's face went pale, and in that moment, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that Max had just saved her life. Again. As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, Sarah knelt beside her partner and placed her hand on his head. "Good boy, Max. I should have trusted you from the beginning." Max's tail wagged once, briefly, but his eyes never left Dr. Reed. The dog knew the job wasn't finished. The hospital lobby erupted into controlled chaos as police officers flooded through the entrance. Sarah watched Reed's hands carefully, noting how they trembled slightly as he tried to maintain his composure. Max remained at full alert, his body language telling Sarah that whatever he'd detected about this man was still very much present. "Officer Collins," Reed said, his voice now carrying an edge of desperation masked as professional concern. "This is highly irregular. I'm simply trying to help you arrange care for your partner." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of," Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off him as Detective Morrison approached with 2 uniforms in tow. Max's growl deepened, and Sarah realized her partner wasn't just warning her about Reed. He was telling her this was bigger than one corrupt doctor. Much bigger. The fluorescent lights of police headquarters cast harsh shadows across Detective James Morrison's weathered face as he slammed a thick file onto the metal table. Sarah had been right to call for backup, more right than even she could have imagined. 12 missing bottles of morphine, 18 vials of fentanyl, and enough pentobarbital to put down a horse, Morrison announced, his voice grim with the weight of discovery. All from Mercy General's pharmacy, all with Reed's fingerprints on the security logs. Sarah sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, Max lying at her feet in that alert position she knew meant he was still processing threats. The hospital lobby confrontation had been just the beginning. Now they were deep in the labyrinth of a conspiracy that reached far beyond one corrupt doctor. "But that's not the worst part," Morrison continued, pulling out a manila envelope that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. "We found these in Reed's office safe, the photographs spilled across the table like a deck of cursed cards. Pictures of police officers, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes, all with detailed medical information paper-clipped to their images." Sarah's breath caught in her throat when she saw her own face staring back at her, along with a complete dossier that included not just her cancer diagnosis, but detailed notes about Max's training, age, and operational history. 16 cops, Sarah, all terminal cases, all treated by Reed or doctors in his network over the past 2 years. Morrison's finger traced along the edge of her photograph. 8 of them are already dead. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Dead? How? Officially, complications from their illnesses, heart attacks, organ failure, overdoses classified as accidents. Morrison's jaw tightened. But when you look at the timeline, they all died faster than their original prognosis suggested. Much faster. Max shifted beside Sarah's chair, a low whine escaping his throat. She reached down to touch his head, finding comfort in the familiar warmth of his fur. The dog had saved her from becoming number 9 on Reed's list. "There's something else," Morrison said, hesitating in that way that meant the news was about to get worse. "Every one of these officers had a K9 partner." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "What happened to the dogs?" "That's what we're trying to figure out." Reed had detailed files on each animal, age, training specialty, handlers they'd worked with, but after their partners died, the dogs just disappeared, officially adopted by loving families, but we can't track down a single adoption record. The implications crashed over Sarah like a tsunami. This wasn't just about eliminating terminal cops, it was about erasing any evidence, any witnesses, any partners who might recognize scents or behaviors that could compromise future operations. "They were killing the dogs too," she whispered. Morrison nodded grimly. "We think so." Reed wasn't just running a drug theft operation, Sarah. He was systematically eliminating police officers and their K9 partners who might have information about previous cases, including that airport drug bust you and Max worked 18 months ago. The memory flooded back. The biggest drug interdiction in Atlanta's history. Cocaine hidden in medical supplies bound for hospitals throughout the Southeast. Max had detected the drugs, Sarah had coordinated the bust, and they dismantled what they thought was the entire network. Reed was on the receiving list for those medical supplies, Sarah said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. He reported the theft that led to our investigation. Exactly. He used you to eliminate his competition, then took over their operation, and now he's been systematically killing everyone who could connect him to the original case. Sarah stood up abruptly, Max immediately rising to match her movement. The room seemed to spin slightly. Whether from the cancer, the shock, or the medication Reed had been giving her, she couldn't tell. "How many more are on his list?" she asked. Morrison consulted his notes. "Based on the files we found, at least 6 active officers. All veterans, all with K9 partners, all who worked cases involving medical supply theft or hospital-related drug interdiction. We have to warn them." Already started making calls. "But Sarah," Morrison's expression grew even more grave. 3 of them aren't answering their phones. Their families say they got calls from Reed's office earlier today about emergency consultations for their medical conditions." The chair squeaked as Sarah gripped its back, her knuckles white with tension. "They're executing the plan right now." Max suddenly stood at attention, his ears pricked forward, staring at the door to the interrogation room. A moment later, Morrison's phone buzzed with an urgent text message. "Reed's been released on bail," Morrison read, his face darkening. "His lawyer claimed medical emergency procedures, insufficient evidence. He's back on the street." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Then he knows we're on to him. He'll accelerate the timeline." As if summoned by her words, Morrison's phone rang. The conversation was brief, tense, filled with the kind of police codes that meant something had gone very wrong. "Officer Martinez didn't come home last night," Morrison reported after hanging up. "Roberto Martinez from the Drug Task Force. His wife said he got a call from Reed about an urgent treatment for his lung cancer. That was 8 hours ago." Sarah's face went pale. She knew Roberto. He'd worked the airport case with them, had been there when Max first detected the cocaine in those medical supplies. If Reed was targeting officers from that bust, then Roberto was probably already dead. "Where would he take them?" she asked. Morrison was already reaching for his coat. "Reed has a private clinic in the suburbs, licensed for alternative treatments, and far enough from the city that no one would hear screams." Max's entire body had gone rigid, his nose working frantically as if he could scent the danger from miles away. Sarah knew that look. It was the expression he wore when they were about to walk into the most dangerous situations of their careers. "Then that's where we're going," she said, checking her weapon and adjusting Max's tactical harness. "Time to finish what we started at the airport." As they headed for the door, Max pressed against Sarah's leg in that protective way that meant he understood the stakes. This wasn't just another case. It was their final mission together, and quite possibly their last chance to save lives. The hunt for Dr. Reed was about to begin. The dusty photograph in Sarah's hands showed a much younger version of herself, standing beside an 8-week-old Max at the Atlanta Police K9 training facility. 6 years ago, when she thought the hardest thing she'd ever face was learning to trust a 4-legged partner after losing her human one in a shootout that still haunted her dreams. "You picked me that day," she whispered to Max, who lay beside her chair in the empty precinct break room at 2 a.m. Morrison had gone home to catch a few hours of sleep before they resumed hunting Reed, but Sarah knew rest wouldn't come. The pain in her abdomen was getting worse, and the questions multiplying in her mind wouldn't let her close her eyes. Max lifted his head, studying her with those intelligent brown eyes that had learned to read her moods better than any human ever had. In the photo, he was just a fuzzy ball of energy with oversized ears. Now he was a seasoned veteran, his dark coat marked with small scars from their years of dangerous work together. Sarah set down the photo and picked up another, their first successful drug bust, both of them grinning at the camera beside a table covered with confiscated cocaine. She remembered that day perfectly. Max had been nervous, making his detection signal, but then second-guessing himself when the human officers couldn't immediately find anything. It was Sarah who trusted his instincts, ordered the deeper search that revealed 50 kilograms of pure Colombian cocaine hidden in a false-bottom suitcase. "That was when I learned to really listen to you," she said, scratching behind Max's ears in the spot that always made his tail wag. "When I stopped thinking of you as just a tool and started seeing you as my partner." The memory brought back others, nights when Sarah couldn't sleep because of nightmares about her former partner, Detective Tony Reeves, shot down in an alley while Sarah was trapped behind a dumpster, helpless to save him. Max had seemed to sense those dark moments, would pad quietly into her bedroom and rest his head on her chest until the trembling stopped. But it was the airport case that had truly cemented their partnership. 18 months ago, acting on a tip about suspicious cargo shipments, they'd been part of a massive operation at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Max had alerted to a shipment of medical supplies bound for hospitals throughout the southeast, his behavior so intense that Sarah had insisted on a complete inspection despite pressure from airport officials to expedite the process. "You knew something was wrong even then," Sarah said, pulling out a newspaper clipping from the case file. The headline read, "Record Drug Bust at Atlanta Airport. K-9 Unit Saves Lives." In the accompanying photo, Max sat proudly beside a mountain of confiscated cocaine, while Sarah shook hands with the airport police chief. What they'd discovered that day had been staggering. Nearly half a ton of pure cocaine, expertly concealed within legitimate medical supply shipments. The drugs were worth over $50 million on the street, destined for distribution networks across Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. Sarah flipped through the arrest records from that case, names and faces she'd nearly forgotten until now. The ringleader had been a man named Carlos Mendez, who'd claimed to be importing medical equipment but was actually running one of the largest cocaine distribution networks in the southeast. He'd been sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. But looking at the evidence list now, with the knowledge of Reed's involvement, Sarah began to see connections she'd missed before. The medical supplies hadn't just been a cover, they'd been part of the destination. Reed's name appeared multiple times in the shipping manifests as a receiving physician for legitimate equipment orders that had been scheduled to arrive the same day as the drug shipment. "Son of a bitch," Sarah muttered, causing Max to lift his head with concern. Reed was expecting that shipment. "When we busted Mendez's operation, we didn't just catch drug dealers, we disrupted Reed's supply line." Max's ears perked up at the change in Sarah's tone. Even half asleep, he could sense when she'd shifted into investigative mode. She reached for her laptop, ignoring the stabbing pain in her side as she leaned forward to access the police database. The deeper she dug, the clearer the picture became. Reed hadn't just been a customer in Mendez's operation, he'd been a partner. The doctor had been providing medical-grade cocaine and synthetic opioids to Mendez's network in exchange for pure cocaine that Reed then processed and distributed through a network of corrupt medical professionals. "That's why he reported the theft that led to our investigation," Sarah said aloud, Max now fully alert beside her. Reed knew Mendez was getting sloppy, drawing too much attention. So he used us to eliminate his partner and take over the entire operation himself. The realization brought a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her cancer. Sarah and Max hadn't just solved a case. They'd been manipulated into doing Reed's dirty work. Every officer who'd worked that bust, every K-9 that had detected evidence, every piece of testimony they'd given had helped Reed consolidate his criminal empire. She found the personnel files for the airport case next. Detective Roberto Martinez, missing for over 12 hours now, Sergeant Lisa Chen, who hadn't answered her phone since yesterday, Officer Michael Thompson, whose wife had reported him missing after he'd left for an emergency medical consultation. All of them had been at the airport that day. All of them had seen the evidence, knew the details of Mendez's operation, could potentially connect Reed to the original drug network. "And all of them have canine partners," Sarah whispered, the full scope of Reed's plan becoming horrifyingly clear. Max whined softly, pressing his head against Sarah's leg. In 6 years of partnership, he'd never seen her cry, but tears were streaming down her face now, tears of rage, grief, and determination. "I'm sorry, boy," she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'm so sorry I almost gave you to that monster. I should have trusted you from the beginning." Max's response was to lick her face once, gently, then settle his head in her lap, with the kind of patient devotion that had sustained her through the darkest moments of her career and her illness. Sarah looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. In a few hours, she and Morrison would begin the search for Reed's private clinic, hopefully in time to save Roberto Martinez and the others. But she knew with growing certainty that this would be her last case, her final chance to make things right. The cancer was winning. Reed's manipulation of her medication had accelerated the decline, and she could feel her strength ebbing with each passing hour. But Max was still strong, still alert, still ready to follow her into whatever danger lay ahead. "One more time, partner," she said, scratching behind his ears. "One more case, and then we make sure everyone knows what Reed really is." Max's tail thumped once against the floor, his way of saying he was ready. Outside, Atlanta slept on, unaware that a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of their medical system was about to be exposed by a dying cop and her faithful four-legged partner. Sarah closed the case files and prepared for what she knew would be the most important few hours of her life. The hunt for Dr. Reed would begin at dawn, and this time she and Max would be ready for whatever they found. The abandoned veterinary clinic on the outskirts of Atlanta looked like a place where hope went to die. Sarah pressed her binoculars against the cruiser's window, watching the building through the pre-dawn darkness, while Max panted anxiously in the back seat, his nose working overtime to process scents carried on the morning breeze. 3 vehicles in the parking lot, Morrison reported through the radio from his position on the building's north side, including Martinez's Honda Civic. "Sarah, they're definitely in there." Sarah's hands trembled as she adjusted her tactical vest, the cancer and lack of sleep making every movement feel like she was moving through quicksand. But Max's presence in the back seat gave her strength. His alert posture and focused attention told her he was ready for whatever they'd find inside that clinic. "Movement in the East Wing," came another voice through the radio, Officer Jackson from the SWAT team Morrison had called in. "Looks like someone's trying to dispose of something in the back alley. Could be medical waste. Or bodies," Sarah thought grimly. After 18 hours of investigation, they'd uncovered the full scope of Reed's operation. The alternative treatment clinic was actually a killing ground, where Reed and his associates eliminated police officers and their K-9 partners who posed threats to their drug trafficking network. "ETA on the warrant?" Sarah asked, checking her weapon for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "Judge Rodriguez is signing it now," Morrison replied. "But Sarah, if they're disposing of evidence, we might not have time to wait for—" His words were cut off by Max's sudden explosion of barking from the back seat. The dog was staring intently at the clinic's main entrance, his body rigid with the kind of alertness Sarah had learned meant immediate danger. "What is it, boy?" she asked, turning to follow his gaze. Through the building's glass doors, she could see figures moving in what appeared to be surgical scrubs. One of them was wheeling something on a gurney, something human-sized covered by a white sheet. "Morrison, they're moving the bodies," Sarah said into her radio, her voice tight with urgency. "We can't wait for the warrant." Sarah, we need to do this by the book." "The book doesn't account for cops being murdered while we fill out paperwork," she snapped back, opening her door. Max immediately jumped over the seat to follow her, his tactical harness gleaming in the streetlight. Sarah knew she was making a career-ending decision, potentially invalidating any evidence they might find by entering without a warrant. But Roberto Martinez had been missing for 20 hours, and she could see through the clinic windows that Reed's people were in full cleanup mode. "I'm going in," she announced. "Max detected something, and I'm following my K9 partner's lead." That's procedure. It was a thin legal justification, but it was all she had. Max's detection abilities had held up in court dozens of times before. His alerts constituted probable cause for search and seizure. The clinic's front door was unlocked, which immediately set off alarm bells in Sarah's mind. Either Reed's people were incredibly sloppy, or they were expecting company. Max pressed close to her leg as they entered the sterile white hallway, his nose working frantically to process the cocktail of scents, medical disinfectant, fear, death, and something else that made his hackles rise. "Drug manufacturing," Sarah whispered, recognizing Max's body language. "They're cooking something in here." They moved deeper into the building, following a trail of wet footprints that led toward what had once been the clinic's surgical suite. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat sending waves of pain through her cancer-ravaged body. But Max's steady presence kept her focused. The surgical suite door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Sarah could see 3 figures in blood-stained scrubs working frantically around a stainless steel table. On the table was a body, male, wearing what looked like the remnants of a police uniform, Roberto Martinez. Sarah's training took over, suppressing the surge of grief and rage that threatened to overwhelm her. She counted the figures in the room, assessed their positions, looked for weapons or escape routes. Max remained perfectly still beside her, waiting for her signal. But as Sarah prepared to radio for backup and coordinate an entry, Max suddenly stiffened and turned toward a door at the far end of the hallway. His low growl told her they weren't alone in the building. "Well, well," came a familiar voice from behind them. "Officer Collins and her faithful companion. I was wondering when you'd track me down." Sarah spun around to find Dr. Reed standing 10 feet away, no longer wearing his pristine white coat. Instead, he was dressed in surgical scrubs, darkened with stains that Sarah didn't want to identify. In his hand was a large syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Dr. Reed," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady while her hand moved slowly toward her weapon. "You're under arrest for the murder of—" "Oh, please," Reed interrupted with a laugh that held no warmth. "Do you really think I'm going to let you walk out of here? You and that dog have caused me far too much trouble already." Max's growl deepened, and Sarah could feel the tension radiating from his body. Her partner was ready to attack on her command, but Reed was too far away for Max to reach before he could use whatever was in that syringe. "The airport bust was brilliant, I'll give you that," Reed continued, taking a step closer. "Using your investigation to eliminate Mendez and his crew while making me look like an innocent victim. But then you started asking questions, getting too close to connections you should have left alone. So you decided to kill us," Sarah said, buying time while she tried to figure out how to get close enough to Reed without endangering Max. "Kill you? Oh no, Officer Collins, I was trying to save you." Reed's smile was grotesque. "A quick, painless death from an overdose of pain medication. Much more merciful than what you're facing now. Months of agony as the cancer eats you alive." Sarah felt Max shift beside her, preparing to spring, but Reed seemed to anticipate the movement. "I wouldn't," he said, holding up the syringe. "This contains enough concentrated fentanyl to kill both of you in 30 seconds. And unlike your cancer medication, this dose really will be fatal." Through the radio, clipped to Sarah's vest, came Morrison's voice. "Sarah, respond. We have the warrant, and SWAT is moving to surround the building." Reed's expression darkened. "Looks like we're running out of time for civilized conversation." Sarah knew she had one chance. Reed was focused on the syringe, confident in his position of power, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the bond between Sarah and Max. "Max," she said quietly, using the hand signal they'd practiced thousands of times. "Take him down." The Belgian Malinois exploded into motion, covering the 10 feet between him and Reed in less than 2 seconds. Reed tried to swing the syringe toward the attacking dog, but Max hit him with 70 pounds of muscle and training, driving him backward into the wall. Sarah was moving before Reed hit the ground, her weapon drawn and trained on the doctor as Max pinned him to the floor. The syringe had gone flying, its contents spilling harmlessly across the linoleum. "It's over, Reed," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Morrison, we have him. Send medical to the surgical suite. Martinez needs immediate attention." As SWAT officers flooded into the building and Reed was taken into custody, Sarah knelt beside Max and wrapped her arms around his neck. Once again, her partner had saved her life, and quite possibly the lives of every police officer Reed had targeted. "Good boy," she whispered into his fur. "We got him, Max. We finally got him." Max's tail wagged once, and Sarah knew that despite everything, the cancer, the betrayal, the violence, they'd completed their mission together. The hunt for Dr. Reed was over. The interrogation room at Atlanta Police Headquarters felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Dr. Marcus Reed sat handcuffed to the metal table, his formerly pristine appearance now disheveled and stained with evidence of his crimes. Across from him, Sarah fought waves of pain and nausea, while Max lay at her feet, never taking his eyes off the man who had tried to kill them both. 12 dead police officers, Sarah said, sliding crime scene photos across the table. 15 murdered K9 partners, a drug trafficking operation worth over $100 million. You want to tell me how a respected oncologist becomes a mass murderer? Reed's laugh was bitter and hollow. Respected? Do you have any idea what it's like to watch people die every single day, to pump them full of chemicals that make them suffer for months before they finally get the mercy of death? So you decided to play God, Morrison interjected from his position by the door. Speed up the process for cops who might expose your drug operation. I was being merciful, Reed snapped, his composure finally cracking. Collins here was going to suffer for months. I was giving her a peaceful end while eliminating a threat to my business. 2 birds, 1 stone. Max's growl filled the room, low and threatening. Sarah placed her hand on his head, feeling the tension radiating through his body. Even now, her partner was ready to protect her from this monster. "What about Roberto Martinez?" Sarah demanded. "What about Lisa Chen and Michael Thompson? Were you being merciful when you tortured them for information before killing them?" Reed's eyes glittered with malice. They knew too much about the airport case, about my connection to Carlos Mendez, about the medical supply shipments that you and your mutt disrupted. Sarah leaned forward despite the pain lancing through her abdomen. "You used us. You fed us information to eliminate your competition, then tried to kill us to cover your tracks. Brilliant, wasn't it?" Reed's smile was grotesque. "The Atlanta Police Department's finest K9 unit, doing my dirty work and never suspecting a thing, at least until today." The door to the interrogation room opened, and Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh entered with a thick folder of documents. Sarah had worked with Walsh on dozens of cases over the years. She was one of the toughest prosecutors in Georgia. "Dr. Reed," Walsh said, taking a seat beside Sarah, "we've executed search warrants on your home, your practice, and your financial records. We've also arrested 6 other medical professionals in your network." Reed's confident expression began to waver. "Dr. Amanda Foster at Piedmont Hospital, Dr. James Chen at Emory, Nurse Patricia Williams at Grady Memorial." Walsh read from her list with clinical precision. "All of them singing like canaries about your operation. All of them providing testimony about how you recruited them, how you divided up territories, how you eliminated police officers who posed threats." Sarah watched Reed's face go pale as the scope of his collapsed empire became clear. "We've also recovered the bodies of all 15 K9 partners you murdered," Walsh continued, "buried in a mass grave behind your clinic. The forensic evidence is overwhelming." Max whined softly, and Sarah realized her partner somehow understood that his fallen comrades had been found. Justice was finally being served for the dogs who had died protecting their human partners. "Here's what's going to happen," Walsh said, leaning back in her chair. "You're going to be charged with 12 counts of first-degree murder for the police officers you killed, 15 counts of animal cruelty for the K9 partners, federal drug trafficking charges, conspiracy, racketeering. You're looking at life without parole, possibly the death penalty." Reed's hands began to shake. "I want a lawyer." "Oh, you'll get one," Sarah said, standing slowly with Max rising beside her. "But they won't be able to help you. Not with the evidence we have, not with the testimony from your own partners." As they prepared to leave the interrogation room, Reed called out desperately, "Wait! Collins, wait! I can give you information about other operations, other corrupt doctors, other networks." Sarah paused at the door, looking back at the man who had tried to kill her and her partner. "Too late for that, Reed. You made your choice when you decided to murder cops and their dogs." "You don't understand," Reed pleaded. "This goes deeper than just Atlanta. There are networks in every major city: Miami, New York, Chicago. I can give you names, locations, evidence." Sarah felt Morrison's hand on her shoulder, urging her to leave, but she turned back one more time. "You know what I understand," she said, her voice filled with quiet fury. "I understand that you're a coward who preyed on dying cops and their loyal partners. I understand that you tried to use the badge I've worn with honor for 20 years to protect your criminal empire. And I understand that you'll spend the rest of your miserable life in a cage, which is exactly what you deserve." Max barked once, sharply, as if adding his own judgment to Sarah's words. Outside the interrogation room, Sarah leaned against the wall as waves of pain and exhaustion washed over her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the investigation was fading, leaving behind the stark reality of her condition. "Sarah," Morrison said gently, "you should be in a hospital. Real doctors, proper medication, not whatever Reed was giving you." "I know," she said, looking down at Max, who was watching her with concern in his intelligent eyes. "But I needed to see this through. I needed to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else." Walsh approached them, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal sympathy. "Sarah, I want you to know, this case will make national headlines. Reed's network was one of the largest medical corruption schemes in U.S. history. Because of you and Max, we've prevented dozens of other murders." Sarah nodded, but her focus was on Max. Her partner had been by her side through every moment of this investigation, from the first warning in the hospital lobby to the final arrest at the clinic. He had saved her life repeatedly, and now it was time for her to save his. "Morrison," she said quietly, "I need you to make some calls. Detective Lisa Park from the K9 unit. She lost her partner 6 months ago. I want her to meet Max. I want to make sure he has a good home when—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Morrison understood. "Already taken care of," he said gently. "Park's been hoping for a new partner. She knows Max's reputation, knows what you two have accomplished together. He'll be in good hands." Max looked up at Sarah as if he understood the conversation. His tail wagged once, softly, and Sarah knew her partner would be okay. The case against Dr. Reed was closed, but Sarah Collins and Max still had one final chapter to write together. As they walked out of Atlanta Police Headquarters for what Sarah knew would be the last time, she felt a sense of completion. They had served with honor, protected the innocent, and brought justice to those who thought they were above the law, together, as they had always been. 6 months later, the autumn sun filtered through the windows of the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta as Sarah Collins watched Dr. Marcus Reed receive his sentence. Life without parole, plus an additional 300 years for the murders of 12 police officers and their K9 partners. The judge's words echoed through the packed courtroom like a death knell for one of the most heinous criminals in Georgia's history. The court finds that the defendant's actions represent not just criminal behavior, but a betrayal of the trust placed in medical professionals and a systematic attack on law enforcement, Judge Patricia Morrison declared. The defendant will spend the remainder of his natural life in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Sarah sat in the front row, Max at her side in his tactical harness one final time. Against all medical predictions, she had survived long enough to see justice served. The proper cancer treatment she'd received after Reed's arrest had slowed the disease's progression, giving her precious months she'd never expected to have. Beside her sat Detective Lisa Park, the young K-9 officer who would soon become Max's new partner. Sarah had spent weeks training with Lisa, teaching her Max's signals, his preferences, his incredible abilities. The transition wouldn't be easy, but Sarah knew Max would serve with the same loyalty and courage that had defined their partnership. 12 families have closure today, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh said as they left the courthouse. 15 K-9 units have been honored and remembered, and thanks to your investigation, we've dismantled drug trafficking networks in 6 states. Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on Max, who was greeting well-wishers and fellow officers in the courthouse lobby. Even at 7 years old, he remained alert and eager, his tail wagging as children from the police families petted him and called him a hero. He knows this is special, Lisa Park observed, watching Max's interaction with the crowd. It's like he understands that today is about honoring all the partners who didn't make it home. Sarah smiled, thinking of Rex, Bella, Titan, and all the other K-9 officers whose lives had been cut short by Reed's greed. Their sacrifice had not been forgotten, and their memory would live on in the memorial garden being built at the Atlanta Police K-9 Training Center. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her backyard, watching Max chase a tennis ball with the energy of a dog half his age. The cancer was still there, still growing, but the legitimate medical treatment had given her more time than she'd dared hope for. Time to see Reed convicted, time to train Lisa, time to arrange for Max's future. You've got maybe 6 months, Dr. Susan Martinez had told her the week before. Dr. Martinez was Roberto's widow, a physician who had taken over Sarah's care after Reed's arrest. Maybe longer if we're lucky, but Sarah, you've already beaten the odds. Reed's medication should have killed you months ago. 6 months felt like a gift. 6 months to watch Max work with his new partner, to see him continue the career that had defined both their lives. The phone rang, and Sarah answered to hear Morrison's familiar voice. Sarah, turn on Channel 5. They're running a special about the Reed case. On television, Sarah watched footage of their final raid on Reed's clinic, interviews with the families of murdered officers, and a segment about the ongoing investigation into medical corruption nationwide. The reporter called it one of the most significant criminal justice victories in recent memory, made possible by the intuition of a dying police officer and her loyal K-9 partner. Max barked at the television when his image appeared on screen, making Sarah laugh, despite the gravity of the subject. Even after everything they'd been through, her partner could still find moments of levity. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood at the Atlanta Police K-9 Training Center, watching Max work his first official patrol with Detective Park. They moved together with growing confidence, Max's years of experience complementing Lisa's fresh enthusiasm and energy. He's adapting well, Chief Williams observed, joining Sarah at the observation window. Park says he's been protective of her from day one, like he knows she's his responsibility now. Sarah watched Max alert to a hidden drug sample during a training exercise, his body language as precise and reliable as ever. Lisa immediately recognized the signal and called in the find, earning praise from the training instructors. He'll take care of her, Sarah said softly, just like he took care of me. That night, Sarah made a decision that had been weighing on her mind for weeks. She called Lisa and asked her to bring Max to the house for what she knew would be their final evening together as a team. They sat in Sarah's living room, Max sprawled across both their laps as they looked through photo albums chronicling 6 years of partnership. Airport drug busts, bomb threat responses, search and rescue operations, community events where Max had charmed children and adults alike. "He saved my life more times than I can count," Sarah told Lisa. "Not just physically, but emotionally. After I lost my previous partner, I thought I'd never trust anyone again. Max taught me that some bonds are stronger than fear." Lisa nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility she was inheriting. "I'll take good care of him, Sarah. I promise." "I know you will," Sarah replied, scratching behind Max's ears. "He's got a lot of good years left in him, a lot of lives still to save." As Lisa prepared to leave with Max, Sarah knelt beside her partner one final time. She removed his tactical harness and replaced it with the new one Lisa had brought, officially transferring him to his new handler. "Be good for Lisa," Sarah whispered into Max's ear. "Protect her like you protected me. And remember, you're not just a good dog. You're a great cop." Max licked her face once, gently, then walked to Lisa's side. He looked back at Sarah for a long moment, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand that this was goodbye. 2 months later, Detective Lisa Park and Max made their first major drug bust together, interdicting 50 kilograms of cocaine at a warehouse on Atlanta's south side. The news report mentioned that Max was continuing the legacy of his previous partner, Officer Sarah Collins, who had passed away peacefully in her sleep the week before. At Sarah's funeral, over 1,000 police officers from across the Southeast gathered to honor a woman who had served with distinction for 20 years. Max sat at attention beside her casket, wearing his dress uniform harness and the Medal of Valor that had been awarded posthumously to Sarah for her work in exposing the Reed conspiracy. As the service concluded and the honor guard fired their final salute, Max's single bark echoed across the cemetery, a final farewell from a partner who had never forgotten his first and greatest teacher. The case of Dr. Marcus Reed was closed, but the legacy of Sarah Collins and Max lived on in every life they had saved, every criminal they had stopped, and every reminder that justice, loyalty, and love could triumph over even the darkest evil. In the end, a dying cop and her faithful dog had not only solved their final case, they had saved an entire system from corruption and reminded everyone that heroes come in all forms, walking on 2 legs and 4. Max continued to serve with Detective Park for 4 more years, retiring at age 11 to live with Lisa's family. He passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 13, surrounded by the people who loved him. His name was added to the K9 Memorial Wall alongside Sarah's, ensuring that their partnership would be remembered forever as one of the finest in Atlanta police history. Justice had been served, and 2 heroes had earned their rest.